I sat in the sleek home office of our suburban house in California, the hum of my dual monitors filling the quiet room. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting stripes over the desk where my laptop glowed with numbers. I knew by heart my investments had been skyrocketing for months. Tech stocks, cryptocurrency, and a few high-risk ventures were all performing beyond expectations. But today I decided to play a dangerous game. I would pretend that my accounts were frozen, that all the money I had worked so hard to grow was suddenly inaccessible. My heart raced a mixture of excitement and guilt. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about observation. I wanted to see who my wife truly was. When faced with the illusion of scarcity, would she panic, plead, or reveal her true priorities? I rubbed my temples and imagined her reaction. I had to be careful not to overplay it. A single suspicious glance could ruin everything. Footsteps on the polished hardwood floor made me glance up. There she was, effortlessly stylish in her casual morning wear, carrying a cup of latte. Her eyes met mine. Curious and unconcerned, "Good morning," she said, placing the cup beside my keyboard. She leaned on the desk, looking at the screens without interest. "So what about my allowance this month?" Her tone was light casual, as if this were a minor administrative matter, rather than a conversation about hundreds of thousands of dollars. I froze for a moment, forcing a concerned expression. "Ah, well, nothing's moved yet," I muttered, letting my voice carry a faint note of worry. I saw her brow furrow slightly, but she didn't probe further. She trusted me, or at least she assumed I was handling it. I nodded slowly, pretending to scroll through the frozen dashboards. Internally, I was smiling. She sipped her latte relaxed, glancing at her phone, scrolling through notifications. Completely unaware of the elaborate ruse I had set up, "I'll make do," she said, lightly setting the cup down and walking toward the living room. But the casualness of her statement sent a shiver down my spine. Was she prepared to make sacrifices if money wasn't flowing? Or would her patience run thin? I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. The truth was that I had always been cautious with money, always thinking several steps ahead. My portfolio wasn't just numbers. It was security, future plans, and a legacy. And now it was a test. My plan was simple: observe record reactions, and reveal the truth only when I had learned what I needed. The morning passed slowly, each tick of the clock amplifying my anticipation. I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of amusement and anxiety. How far would she push if she believed we had nothing? Would she even notice small compromises? Or would luxury override caution? Today I wasn't just an investor. I was a silent observer in my own house, watching human nature unfold in real time. By the time she returned to ask again casually about a minor expense, I felt a thrill of anticipation. The experiment had begun the following day. The experiment continued, and I watched my wife closely, pretending the accounts were still frozen. She started suggesting purchases, small at first, almost innocuous. A new designer bag she claimed was on sale, a spa appointment she said she had earned. I acted concerned, letting my forehead crease slightly, and glancing at the frozen balances on my laptop. Her excitement didn't waver. She assumed I was struggling to cover even the basics. By mid-morning, she began hinting at bigger expenses. "I was thinking of getting a few pieces for the living room," she said, as if it were a mere afterthought. "The couch cushions are outdated, and I saw some art online that would really brighten that space." I nodded slowly, pretending to calculate in my head. My voice carried a hesitant tone. "We might not be able to do that right now." She tilted her head, brow furrowing ever so slightly, but didn't push too hard. I could see the subtle tension flicker across her face, a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. As the day wore on, her requests grew bolder. She mentioned an impromptu weekend getaway to Napa Valley, claiming it was essential for our mental health. I leaned back in my chair, masking a smile, letting the illusion of financial struggle hang in the air. Each time she suggested something new, I kept my tone cautious, my expressions believable. I was careful not to overreact, knowing that any hint of relief could tip her off. Her behavior began revealing patterns I hadn't expected. She wasn't just casual about spending. She seemed almost entitled to it. When she asked about borrowing from friends to cover a temporary shortfall, I felt a flicker of alarm, quickly masked by a neutral expression. I nodded, making vague promises to see what we can do, all the while keeping mental notes. This was more than an experiment. It was a revelation by evening. I noticed the shift in her demeanor. The casual grace she carried earlier had given way to subtle frustration. Her movements were sharper, her voice slightly impatient. When she asked about bills or pending purchases, and yet there was no outright panic, just an expectation that I would solve everything. I realized then that my little test was more than just about money. It was about values, priorities, and the hidden sides of personality that only emerge under pressure. I felt a strange mix of amusement and unease. The money was untouched, yet I was learning truths that couldn't be reversed. Each hint of indulgence, every suggestion of borrowing or splurging, painted a clearer picture of her character. By bedtime, I had made a mental list of all the moments that had surprised me, noting which desires were reasonable and which reflected a sense of entitlement I hadn't fully appreciated before. Lying in bed that night, I watched her sleep for a few moments, calm and unaware, and wondered if revealing the truth would change anything, or if some lessons were better left as silent observations, ready to guide future decisions. I knew one thing: the experiment was far from over, and the revelations of the next few days would determine more than just allowance. They would test trust, patience, and the foundation of our relationship. By the start of the third day, the experiment was beginning to feel more dangerous. My wife had grown bolder, her requests more audacious, as if she believed I truly had nothing to give. This morning, she strolled into the office, coffee in hand, and casually mentioned a small investment opportunity. A friend had pitched. The sum was shocking, more than half of what we'd normally allocate for monthly expenses. My chest tightened, but I forced a composed expression. "We can't right now," I said, letting the hesitation linger just long enough to sound believable. Her eyes flickered with surprise, a brief flash of frustration crossing her face, before she masked it with a polite smile. "Oh, okay," she replied softly, though I could sense the disappointment. I watched her walk away, and a thought struck me. She hadn't even considered negotiating, planning, or saving. She assumed her lifestyle was untouchable. Throughout the day, her behavior grew increasingly audacious. She suggested a spontaneous shopping spree at the luxury mall downtown, claiming she deserved a reward for all the work I do around the house. I kept my calm, feinting the stress of frozen investments. Each request was met with careful hesitation, my expressions calibrated to maintain the illusion. She was walking a delicate line between expectation and frustration, and I was watching closely. Then came the most revealing moment. Around mid-afternoon, she casually suggested borrowing money from a friend to fund a new gadget she claimed would improve her productivity. I felt my pulse quicken, but I stayed composed, pretending to think it over. "We really shouldn't. We can't afford it right now," I said, letting the words hang in the air. Her subtle twitch of irritation told me more than any argument ever could. She was frustrated, yes, but more importantly, she hadn't considered compromise or alternatives. As evening approached, the tension in the house thickened. I noticed little signs: her tapping fingers, her restless pacing, and the way she scrutinized receipts and online prices. She was testing boundaries, pushing to see what she could get away with. And I was learning every nuance of her character. Her desires were clear and her priorities unmistakable. The woman I loved, or thought I knew, was revealing a side I hadn't anticipated: indulgent, impatient, and assuming that resources existed solely to satisfy her wants. Sitting at the dining table later, pretending to review the frozen accounts, I realized the experiment was nearing its climax. My mind raced through every interaction of the day, cataloging each subtle sign of entitlement, each hint of impatience. The longer I watched, the more I understood that this wasn't just about money. It was about values, trust, and the silent truths we often ignore in everyday life. By bedtime, the house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I knew the next step would define everything. I could continue observing, or I could reveal the truth. And when I did, the reactions, the emotions, and the consequences would test not just our patience, but the very foundation of our relationship. The experiment had started as a simple test of character, but it had grown into a defining moment, one that could change everything. The next morning, I decided it was time to end the experiment. I couldn't keep pretending forever. The anticipation had become almost unbearable, and the truths I discovered were too important to ignore. I watched my wife move around the house, casually checking her phone, completely unaware of the storm I had been quietly observing for days. Today she would see the reality, and I would see her true reaction. I called her into the office. She looked at me curiously. Sensing a change in my tone, "Sit down," I said, gesturing toward the chair opposite mine. My heart thumped, but my expression remained calm. I took a deep breath, trying to appear neutral, yet authoritative. "I need to be honest with you." I began. Her eyebrows shot up, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. The investments, they weren't frozen. She froze mid-step, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Wait, what?" Her voice shook a mix of confusion and disbelief. I gestured toward the monitors, where the real accounts glimmered. With the substantial balances I had been hiding, everything is here, all of it. Nothing was ever inaccessible. Her mouth opened, then closed. Then opened again. She couldn't find words. At first I continued calmly, my tone measured. "I wanted to see how you'd react if money wasn't available. I wanted to understand your priorities, your decisions when faced with scarcity." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a hint of guilt and realization dawning on her face. Why would you do this?" she whispered. Voice trembling, I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. "Because actions reveal truths words cannot. I needed to know if you would handle challenges responsibly, or if indulgence would come first in the experiment." It told me a lot. She looked down, ashamed, tracing patterns on the armrest of her chair. I could see the internal struggle, the mixture of embarrassment, guilt, and surprise. I didn't realize, she finally admitted. I thought you were struggling. And I wanted to maintain my life, my routines. I didn't think it through." I nodded slowly. "I know, and that's why I needed to show you, not to punish you, but to make both of us understand the reality of our choices. Money isn't just numbers, it's trust, communication, and respect for each other's priorities." Her eyes met mine, glistening, and I saw the genuine understanding there. "I see it now," she said softly. "I got carried away. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." I smiled faintly, relief washing over me. The tension that had built over days finally eased. "Thank you for saying that. I said I don't want this to be about money alone. It's about how we face challenges together." We sat in silence for a moment, the glow of the screens reflecting off our faces. It was more than an experiment. It was a revelation. Pretending, observing, and testing had shown me the deeper truths about trust, priorities, and the foundation of our partnership. And as I watched her reflect, I realized that sometimes the harshest lessons are the ones that bring clarity and a stronger bond. That day, the illusion ended, but the understanding it created lasted far longer than any account balance could.